Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second session of the Sri Lankan Economic Summit 2020. So the second session is about the role of private sector in driving economic recovery. We've got with us today two speakers, and they will be joined by three thought leaders here who would be joining me here. And they'll take we'll start off with the speakers giving us their view about the role of the private sector and their views on that. And then the thought leaders will join me post that. So to introduce the speakers, we've got firstly, we have Harsha Basnayake, who is the Deputy Area Managing Partner, Asia Pacific Area of Ernst & Young. He would be joined by Prabhash Subasinghe, Chairman of the Sri Lanka Export Development Board, and he's also the Managing Director of the Global Rubber Industries. With me, alongside me in the studio, we've got three panelists. Sanjay Mohotala, he's a Director General of BOI of Sri Lanka. We've got Haja Alafifi, who is the Chairperson and Managing Director of Unilever of Sri Lanka. And we have Pravir Samarasinghe, who is a Group Director and CEO of Overseas Reality Ceylon. So to start, I'll be inviting Harsha Basnayake to share his session with us.
Thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to use a couple of slides, so let me just try and see whether it will work. Okay. Good. So first of all, let me start off by expressing my appreciation to the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce for the invitation to share some of my perspectives at this economic summit. The topic of discussion, the private sector role in driving economic recovery in the current climate, is an interesting and an extremely relevant one. And I've listened to this morning's sessions, and I want to congratulate the Chamber for the launch of the Holistic Economic Acceleration Framework, which I think is a very timely and a fantastic initiative. I've taken the liberty to shape my comments based on my experiences as a professional, a senior executive, and a concerned and interested overseas-based citizen. I think it is also important to clarify that some of these views that I'm going to share with you are personal and not necessarily the views of EY. So with that, let me offer three perspectives to this discussion. Number one, economic revival has to be thought of as an interlocking and continuous effort between the government, businesses, and employees. Number two, this is a time for Sri Lanka to reset our long-term goals, making use of the crisis as an opportunity mindset. And number three, obligation on businesses to reset their purpose for broader interests of stakeholders, particularly at a time when businesses are actually looking to government leadership to navigate the crisis. So let me start with my first perspective. That is, economic revival must be thought of as an interlocking and continuous effort between the government, businesses, and employees. When we think about the state of our economy, it is important to keep in mind that even prior to COVID-19, Sri Lanka's economy has been in a state of stagnation. We have not had the political peace to make long-lasting policy choices. And there has not been time for us to fix the long-lasting structural issues that we have been grappling with for quite some time. Let's reflect on that for a moment. High debt, high spending, heavy concentrated income sources that are vulnerable to external factors, low foreign direct investments, uncoordinated economic policies, and a heavily traumatized society navigating from one crisis to another means that we have been running without a sustained opportunity to pause and recoup our energies. This situation has been further exacerbated by a very disruptive political climate that we have all experienced, a point that need no elaboration to any one of us. That has been the context of our economy when COVID-19 landed on our shores. COVID-19 is an unprecedented shock. It is unlike any other crisis that we have ever known before. It is a health pandemic evolved into an economic and societal crisis that is testing all of our imagination, creativity, scientific and technological boundaries, and the very essence of our well-being as individuals and as well as communities. Nations around the world went into various degrees of lockdown, which interrupted businesses and everyday life on every level. It seemed unthinkable that the entire white-collar workforce of many countries will soon be working solely from home. It seemed unthinkable that air travel would plummet by 96% worldwide. And we are still far away from a health solution, even with the recent announcements of vaccination and trials of vaccination trials. Cascading economic consequences are still unfolding and will likely to be felt for many years to come. Across the world, the resolve to save lives and livelihoods have become the focal point for governments, communities, and businesses alike. The post-COVID-19 world that we refer to is going to be very different to what we had experienced prior to January 2020. While the whole world is confronted with the same storm, we are not on the same boat. Some of us are going to emerge with weaker balance sheets, countries and businesses alike. And Sri Lanka is going to be one on the weaker side unless we galvanize our long-term resolve to manage our risks and reframe a future. And forums like this, discussions like this, are very critical in that regard. Recovery must be thought of from an interlocking and continuous partnership that we, the private sector, must have with the government as well as with our employees. There are spheres of activities that can be undertaken only by the government, but there are many activities that the private sector enterprises can offer to take and lead, and that is what we need to put our energies to think about. In the current circumstances, there is an urgent need to ensure that both the government and businesses engage employees and workers and galvanize their participation. This is important because unlike any other crisis, there is a need to ensure their well-being as well as an understanding of the catastrophic consequences that many in different segments of the society are going through. We need employees and workers to work with businesses and government to make the plans for revival a success. This will only happen if the pathways that we architect take into consideration the need to create jobs, as well as keeping in mind the economic and mental well-being of our people. What the country needs is a new partnership between the government, private sector, employees, and workers to reframe our future, to define long-term economic success. And it's got to be a partnership that is built on a premise where we can separate long-term sustainable policies from short-term politics. This brings me to my second perspective. This is a time for Sri Lanka to reset our long-term goals, making use of the crisis as an opportunity mindset. Unlike any crisis management strategies that we have put in place, the effort of economic revival must be approached with a dual strategy. One that deals with short-term crisis management aspects of the pandemic, and we see a lot of the efforts that the government has put in place on its part has been focused on these aspects. The other is a strategy that understands the consequences and the opportunities of the current crisis and focus entirely about defining what the new normal will present to us as a country. The initiatives that the Chamber is putting in place is absolutely spot on in that regard. I want to spend a few minutes to reflect on this new normal and the consequences and offer 4 domains for us to think about. The first domain is global order. How will COVID-19 alter the structure of the global order? Where will Sri Lanka as a nation state be in that scenario? And what will be the implications to us? The current crisis is having significant implications for the global balance of power. There's a lot of tension against globalization and free trade. An open economy and a small one like ours with limited bargaining powers, there is exposure that will be both good and bad. There will be substantial restructuring of manufacturing of goods as well as food security as the pandemic has exposed vulnerabilities in cross-border supply chains, motivating companies to rethink their global operations and footprints. The restructuring of supply chains started before the crisis, and we expect that to accelerate. The new supply chains will carry built-in redundancy and resilience at the expense of some efficiency. Manufacturing will come closer to home markets, boosting the trend towards regionalization and relocations. We are advocating a China Plus strategy for many companies to consider. Countries like Vietnam, India, Indonesia have started to present themselves as competing, compelling alternatives. Perhaps it is an opportunity for Sri Lanka to consider and be among the alternative locations that businesses can relocate their manufacturing footprints. Labor mobility has fallen sharply since the start of the pandemic. Governments have clamped down on travel and immigration to stem the spread of the virus. There's a strong indication that these measures will last for some time. Is this an opportunity for us to explore different concepts of labor mobility? The rapid and enduring shift to remote work will likely extend beyond the borders. If people can't relocate for work, can work come to them as jobs can be performed remotely? Is there an opportunity for us to look at this for our own advantage? The second domain is about societies and economies. How will COVID-19 affect the structure of societies and economies at national, provincial, and city level? For a long time, a society and a nation state, we have struggled to define our social contract. We've not been able to define a broad and national purpose and that caters to all ethnic groups, women and men, young and old, rich and poor, where a Sri Lankan identity, energy, and values are defined above all else. By a significant margin, COVID-19 has exacerbated inequalities as the pandemic has hit the vulnerable communities the hardest, including youth, women, minorities, low-income classes. Social distancing, working from home, ability to quarantine, and are highly correlated with wealth. As we are witnessing elsewhere in the world, action on social justice issues have increased, and it is likely to increase further. The critical question for us is, can we make a long-term shift to heal our wounds and work towards a more empathetic society that drives value through our diversity? The third domain is businesses and markets. How will COVID-19 change the ways in which businesses and markets operate? The pandemic has put technology and human welfare at the front and center as to how businesses and markets have responded. Businesses that had either adopted digitalization or e-commerce or had the capacity to do so within a very short period of time, have survived and succeeded quite well. As a result, demand for new ways of doing business need to have new channels have emerged. Just in the last 9 months, it has seen an acceleration of internet users and online marketplaces. In Southeast Asia, there are 400 million active online users now. 40 million of them came about over the last 3 months. In India, there are 560 million users. COVID-19 has led to an acceleration of digital consumption as users tried new digital services for the first time. In Southeast Asia, more than 1 in 3 digital service consumers started to use the service during the COVID-19 lockdown. And 94% of them have said that they're likely to continue with the service post-pandemic. Is there an opportunity for Sri Lankan businesses and markets to be redefined by looking at these online e-commerce markets? I also think that we have an opportunity to relook at our geographic position, given our positioning between Middle East, India, and Southeast Asia. If we apply that kind of a mindset, we will be able to develop long-term initiatives to reposition some of our industries. Aviation, tourism, financial services, professional services comes to mind. The fourth domain is about households and individuals. How will COVID-19 affect individuals' behavior and household structures? A focus on households and individuals is important because there have been serious repercussions due to unemployment, underemployment, and the mental health aspect and impact that COVID-19 has brought about. Some of the other themes that could reframe long-term include trust, changing consumption habits, and the need to have focus on mental health. There is also the urban and rural divide, the gaps that we have seen during the lockdown periods. If we are to frame our government, private sector, and employee partnership through these 4 domains, we will be able to define ourselves not just a new normal for the country, but also reshape our future for better. A better future for us as a country, a better health, a better connectivity, better relationships, better ingenuity, and better accountability. I'm sure that as I share these perspectives, you must be wondering, is this really the role of businesses and private sector? This brings me to my third perspective, purposes of businesses and private enterprise. COVID-19 ascended upon us whilst several other disruptions were having some serious consequences on every aspect of society around the world. Economic growth, fueled by forces such as globalization and technology, had lifted more than 500 million people out of poverty since 1990. But it has also brought about many other problems. Income and economic inequality, underemployment, disruption to many industries, business models have become the reality. On top of that, we have come to recognize the devastating consequences of climate change. So across the world, social contracts have been undergoing pressures for some years. Trust between politicians and civil society leaders and citizens, business leaders and employees, and society at large has come under significant threat. Surveys suggest that trust in business and business leaders are low and only somewhat ahead of governments and politicians. The consequences of COVID-19 are going to be playing out this in 2 different ways. One is that it is going to exacerbate the problem. Faced with serious challenges resulting from collapse of many markets and demand, several businesses will have to make some hard decisions. What can an airline without passengers, a hotel, a bar, a restaurant without customers possibly do? They must close down their premises, lay off people, cut costs, shut down their supply chains, and many will look up to governments for assistance. The second is that there is an opportunity for businesses to step up to play a vital role addressing the problems that confront nation states. What should we expect from businesses in such a scenario? These cross-currents have accelerated a movement of consciousness among investors, managements, boards, and even regulators of companies to recognize that the purpose of a business is to profitably solve problems of people and the planet, and not to profit from creating problems. I think this shift in focus of purpose of a business to move beyond the interests of its shareholders to stakeholders, its customers, employees, wider society, and the planet are things that we should reflect on as part of the reset that we have to make. With that, let me pause, and I look forward to the panel discussion.